people have been creating money or currencies for thousands and thousands of years. And in just about every single one of these stories, it always starts with a new ruler, a virtuous society, a new currency. They keep it strong. They expand. Everybody trades in the currency. Then they expand some further. Then they have to fight a war. Then they print more money to fight the war. Then they debase the currency. Pretty soon, the currency isn't worth anything. People don't want to trade with them because they debased the currency. They inflated it away. And then at some point, the soldiers realize that the money they're being paid in is worthless, or the soldiers don't get paid. And when the soldiers don't get paid, they all mutiny or they desert. And then invariably what happens then is someone outside of those borders wins the battle. And of course, that civilization blames their decline on the barbarians. Like, it wasn't our fault. It was bad guys who speak a different language or have a different religion. They actually attacked us unprovoked. And the story is always bad people caused the collapse of our civilization. But the real story generally is the civilization got fat, dumb, and happy, and then they got arrogant, and then they started counterfeiting money, and then they forgot that you can't pay your own soldiers with counterfeit money. And somewhere between the people starving to death or all the soldiers deserting, they found that they weren't able to continue with the wars they were fighting. And then they lose the war. And then the next society rises, and then they do it all over again. And it happens. It's not a dozen times. It's not 100 times. If you read this, it's thousands and thousands of times you see the rise and the decline and the fall and the reemergence. And there are always these common principles. And the principles have to do with power and energy. If you don't understand firepower, like the Japanese, they didn't really want to embrace guns, so they just passed a law, no guns. And then the Westerners showed up with guns. The same thing happened in China for a while, where they wanted to close their borders, and so they were against modern techniques. And then the Westerners show up with firepower, and then the borders get open, and then the political power structure collapses. And then at some point, someone comes up with a better cannon, and the people in denial lose the next battle, and then somebody comes up with a better ship. And then the people in denial have less sea power, and so they get choked to death. And then someone comes up with a tank, and then there's airplanes, and it goes on like that. It's always about harnessing power, harnessing and channeling energy. And you've got the physical energy, and that's how people win the wars. And then you have the economic energy. And all the really good societies, they manage to create trading networks on a strong currency that people trust. And then eventually the grandson of the person that set it up gets a bit cheaper, and then the great grandkids get a bit cheaper. They start fighting amongst each other, then they debase the currency. Then their armies desert them, and their trading partners don't want to trade with them, and all of the commercial energy bypasses them, and then they blame it on the barbarians. And it starts anew. So that's all in Will Durant, if you read it, and what you realize, there's just nothing new under the sun. Everything's been played out, and history is almost the story of a bunch of arrogant alpha males that are a bit ignorant, that think that this time it's different, and they were put on Earth to fix things. And they go, Alexander the Great goes gallivanting off, in his late teenage years. And of course, we call him the Great, but the joke is, after he basically, conquered 200 countries and lost all of his army, he died by age 33, and everything collapses within months after he's dead. So it's like you can do this stuff for a year, 2 years, 10 years, and then everything collapses under its own weight, and it goes on and on and on like that. So I really like listening to that or reading those histories. I think you can learn a lot from them. And the most useful thing you can learn is, this is not the first time this has been done. In fact, it's common throughout human history. every single civilization. It failed because either it couldn't channel power, it was less powerful technically from an engineering point of view, right? Or because it couldn't channel capital, like economic power, and its monetary systems were completely defective, or they were inferior, right? The society that trades glass beads gets stomped on by the society that trades metal coins, and the ones that trade gold coins stomp on the ones that trade copper coins, and then even then, you believe that gold is money. The Spaniards go off, conquer the New World, they bring back all the gold. It doesn't solve the problem because they inflate the gold supply by a factor of 5, so they created hyperinflation. Their own economy collapsed, and the Spanish Empire collapsed because they didn't understand the implications of inflating the money supply, and they figured that out the hard way 1,700 years after the Romans figured it out, and they figured it out 500 years after the Greeks figured it out. And it happened in Egypt, and it happened in Assyria, and it happened in China, and it's happened as many times as we can write it down, and it's probably happened 100,000 times that we didn't write down. And so, yeah, I encourage people to read history, especially good political history, good economic history. And 1500. In 1500, they were using paintings as a store of value in Italy, right? That's an interesting thing that comes out. You'll find all of these principles just keep popping up. How do you find scarce, desirable assets to store your value in a portable fashion? And if you read it, then you'll say, wow, Bitcoin would have solved that problem. The real key is to understand what is Bitcoin's use case. It's digital capital. Well, how big is that? $400 trillion, right? How much capital is locked up in real estate, equity, currency, bonds, collectibles, trophy assets, precious metals in the year 2024? Right? There's probably half the value of most residential real estate is the monetary premium. It's the capital. So, like, how do you know this? I give you a little test. Go to Miami Beach, go up and down the beach, and then count the number of lights on in a condo building on the beach. Or go to Monaco and count the number of lights on. And what you'll find is that 80 to 90% of all of the condos don't have lights on at night. So people have huge amounts of capital tied up in these idle assets. And there's a lot of reasons for them, but one reason is because they feel like their money is safer there. So in the 20th century, people basically bought sports teams. I mean, ask yourself, what do rich people own when they get rich? They bought sports teams, they bought real estate, they bought companies, they bought land, they bought timber rights, they bought oil rights, they bought gold, they bought, bonds. They just bought stuff. Why? Because they knew if they left their money in the bank, it was going to dwindle away. Buy anything. They buy Picassos, they buy art, right? They buy stuff. So there was never a perfect digital capital. There was never a digital instrument where I could, like if you were a rich Russian and you had a choice between buying a bunch of real estate in Moscow or buying Bitcoin, well, with ex post facto hindsight, looking back for the last 30 years. Okay, now let's play that out, and you're a rich Nigerian. Now you're a rich, Turk. Now you're rich in Lebanon, right? And we don't have to be rich. Anybody with any amount of money anywhere in the world, right? You've got the last 100 years of history. You live in Germany in 1930. What do you want, a building or Bitcoin? You live in Argentina. What do you want? You want to own land? You want to own a building? You want a company? You want Bitcoin? The currency is going to collapse 5 times in 140 years. 5 times, right? Okay, so this is why we want to study history. If you study history, you're going to find that the currency collapsed thousands of times. In fact, on average, it collapses everywhere. Probably it collapses everywhere on average every 50 years in the history of the world. And that's maybe me being charitable. So is it too late? Well, can you actually take all of your property, put it in your pocket, and leave the country on one-day notice if you need to? If not, then you're probably not too late, right? So if you go through that exercise, you can't take your building with you. You can't take your bars of gold with you. You can't take your stock shares with you. People for a while, they bought paintings thinking I'll roll them up, but it might not be the easy to, and the average person can't buy Picassos. They're not quite exactly at the price point. How do you buy $237 a Picasso a week, right? So Bitcoin represents digital property. What's the value of digital property? Hundreds of trillions of dollars. Is it overvalued? Not yet. It's $1 trillion right now. So when it's 100 times more valuable than it is right now, will it be overvalued? Not likely. It's probably still going to be appreciating faster than every other thing you can buy. Why? Because it's better than every other thing you can buy. Show me a hotel you can put in your pocket and teleport. Right? $1 billion of gold is like 3,000 pounds, right? How are you going to move that, right? Right? Give me a company that's going to last through the next 3 CEOs, right? Do you know who the 3rd CEO will be after the one that runs the company now? And do you trust that person? Right? The S&P 500, haven't we established there's a 99% failure rate? These are the winners. There's a 99% failure rate to generate shareholder value amongst the 500 best companies in the world. Now, if there's a 99% failure rate amongst the 500 best companies in the world, then what's the failure rate amongst the 100 million companies in the world? And, what's the most successful nation-state currency in the history of the world? Well, if it's the dollar's lost 99.8% of its value in 100 years. Maybe 99.9% of its value. You could debate whether it's 99.8 or 99.9% of its value. Every other currency in every other country lost 100%. So, if you're sitting around wondering, is Bitcoin overvalued? The question is, overvalued versus what? Right? You're going to buy something, right? You're owning something in lieu of Bitcoin. What is that something which is better? Right? That's the real question. Because not selling is buying, but not buying is selling, right? And you've basically got a certain amount of economic energy. It's deployed somewhere, right? And the question is, what are you invested in that you think is better?